Hey everybody, this is Jenna with Horsing Around School Days at MTRA. We're back with another reading from the $80 Champion about Snowman, the horse that inspired a nation. And this week we go into chapter 11. It's called A Grim Business. Again, we're in St. James, Long Island, summer and fall of 1957. The business of horse trading is an ancient art, and prior to the early 20th century, there may have been no more colorful calling in American life. Called David Harem's after a turn of the century fictional character whose dictum was, "Do unto the other feller the way he'd like to do unto you, and do it fust." Horse traders were proud of their ability to drive a hard bargain. As the popular newspaper columnist John Gold said in a 1947 article entitled "Hoss Tradin'," horse swapping is an ancient rite of the race. It is a game of swapping with especially dear to our pioneer stock. A horse trade is a delicate and artful procedure, its cardinal principles deeply embedded in human nature. A horse trader was skilled in the art of euphemism. A barn sour horse, one who refused to leave the stable, was described as quiet at the hitch. A lazy horse was gentle, and a poorly trained horse was spirited. Practices such as feeding old horses pepper to make them appear more lively, dyeing their coats, or stuffing their noses with rags to hide a wheeze were all tricks of the trade. Traditionally, horses were sold as sound, meaning healthy and not lame, strong-winded, which meant able to work, or at halter, meaning in an as-is condition. In the era of horsepower, the breeding, sale, and trade of horses was a big business. In 1897, the Chicago stockyards held the largest horse market in the world. At its peak, it auctioned as many as 60 horses per hour for over 100,000 sold per year. The horse trade dwindled during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, but the market for work horses picked up during the Great Depression. Many Depression-era farmers had been bankrupted, buying farm equipment on credit, and often lacked the cash to pay for gasoline. Bred on the farm and fed homegrown grain, the lowly workhorse was touted as a form of sustainable energy. Then came the war years, when gasoline was rationed, so plow horses retained their popularity. The Percher and Horse Association of America, one of the premier draft horse organizations in the United States, reported an uptick in registrations during the 1930s and 1940s, followed by a swift decline in the early 1950s. By the late 50s, the David Harems, seemingly once a permanent fixture of the American landscape, had begun fading from view. A 1962 Palm Beach Post article about professional horsemen called their work a grim business. Their number having by this point dwindled to only about 2,000, they made money by searching for cheap horses, training them, and trying to sell them to amateur riders who were willing to invest money in show prospects. The horse trade had straightened out since the days when horse traders filed horses' teeth to disguise their age, but not much. A nag parlayed to a trader would get a crash course in how to be a riding horse. If the poor creature failed to learn fast, he might soon meet a miserable fate. Men who were trying to make a living at horses became masters of the quick turnaround. Professional horse traders tried to eke out a living swapping horses before the beasts ate up all their modest profits in hay and grain. Horse trainers were always on the lookout for a talented horse, hoping to resell him quickly at a profit. Sonny Brooks, a New Jersey professional, described his method of trying to get a horse sold. "When I get him on the road, I try to win as much as I can real quick. If he wins good, he'll bring a better price. The faster I sell, the less I have to pay in upkeep. Out on eastern Long Island, where suburban sprawl had not yet taken over, there were still men who made their living from horses. People called them the last of the Mohicans. They were rough in their ways, but skilled in horsemanship, and they knew a bit about every aspect of horse business: shoeing, vetting, horse breaking, and saddle repair. There wasn't anything they couldn't do in a pinch. Equestrianism was a gentleman's sport, but the men who traded in horses were anything but gentlemen. The other traders on Long Island would sell a horse off to the knackers at Northport without giving it a second thought. Board and feed was expensive, and for a horse trader, a horse sitting in the barn unsold was just another column in the red. The luckier horses got sold to the growing cadre of young people taking up the sport of horsemanship. Horseback riding, a sport that evoked both Anglophile gentility and rural roots, was popular among parents who wished to give social advantages to their children. The mid-1950s saw a growth in English-style pony clubs, where suburban youngsters could learn the intricacies of old hunting traditions and memorize the fundamentals of horsemanship from old-fashioned British manuals. When the U.S. Army Cavalry auctioned off the last of its horses after World War II, it gave preference to veterans who wanted to start riding schools. Riding apparel was sold in the active sporting goods section of the 6th floor of Saks Fifth Avenue, where saleslady Elsa Granville Smith proudly proclaimed that she sometimes outfitted daughters, mothers, and grandmothers on the same day, and extolled the virtues of riding for developing poise, grace, and skill. Up-and-coming Americans liked to associate themselves with the glamorous world of horses, thus seeming to gain entry to the gated enclaves of the upper class. The Knox parents were eager for their girls to have these advantages. They came out to the school on the train from the city. The women were clad in furs, wreathed in the expensive scent of Chanel No. 5 or Joy. The fathers were all the same. These were men who had money and demanded the best for their girls. Part of Harry's job was finding horses that would make the Knox girls look good at the local shows. If a horse joined the lesson lineup and a girl fell in love with it, then later Harry might be able to make an easy sale. If he found a good prospect that was too difficult for the girls to ride, a parent might pay for the horse and hand it over to Harry to train, hoping that it would settle down enough to be a suitable junior mount. Harry had already discovered, while working for Mr. Dillard, that the best way for a riding teacher to make money was to find a green prospect, sell it, and make a profit. Easier said than done. Harry had no capital. Harry was also hampered by the fact that he refused to unload a horse, like so much excess inventory. He set his sights on reject horses, the ones that no one else wanted, buying only those for which he thought he could find a home. While trips to the horse auction at New Holland did not often turn up pearls, there was another great pipeline available for young green horses: the racetrack. Beautiful thoroughbreds, bred to race, were sold off to the highest bidder if they turned out to be slow. Many of these horses, with their fine bloodlines and elegant conformation, were snapped up by trainers hoping to turn them into show horses. Thoroughbreds are specifically bred to be high-strung. They need to charge through a starting gate on a hair trigger at top speed, but many of these horses could be turned into jumpers with the right kind of training. One of these off-the-track thoroughbreds might have the right stuff to become a champion jumper if a trainer had enough patience and skill. A thoroughbred would have a much better shot than Harry's pet project, Snowman. In the 1950s, Long Island had one of the top concentrations of champion trainers and riders in the world. It was a breeding ground for current and future Olympians. The competition here would rival that found anywhere in the world. Harry wanted to compete. Without funds to buy himself a horse, Harry's best bet was to find a good prospect for one of his students. The father would put up the cash. Harry could season the horse for a year or two before passing it to the girl to ride, devoting a couple of years to a decent animal and hopefully winning his share of ribbons. But that horse would not be Harry's own horse. It would belong to someone else. Still, that was the fastest way to get into competition, the pathway taken by other professional riders. Harry had a pretty good prospect in the barn right now, St. John. The horse was too challenging for the students to ride, but Harry had started him out himself in some smaller shows and had already brought home some blue ribbons. St. John, a thoroughbred, came from the Charlestown racetrack. Right away, the gelding showed talent as a jumper, but he had too many vices. He was a dirty stopper, sometimes skidding to a stop right in front of a fence, a dangerous habit that could unseat even the most skilled rider. Not only that, but he had a major stable vice. He was a weaver. This meant that he was so high-strung that he could not relax in his stall, but hung his head over the Dutch door, rocking back and forth. The nervous habit kept him chronically exhausted and underweight. A Pennsylvania horse trader, Joe Green, did not want to bother with the problem horse, and he was looking to unload him cheap. One of the fathers at Knox had been interested. He'd agreed to let Harry train the horse and take him to some shows in the hope that his daughter would eventually ride him. The bay was the dead opposite of Snowman. Where the plow horse was placid and easygoing, St. John reflected every inch of his thoroughbred breeding. Even though he had been too slow to race successfully, he still had the volatile reflexes and touching disposition that is bred into thoroughbreds to make them fast. When Harry could get St. John to keep it together, the gelding did pretty well, and he was a typically handsome thoroughbred, the kind of horse that looked as if he belonged in the show ring, not as if he used to work the fields. Horse shows have different divisions, based on the different kinds of work equines traditionally did outside the show ring. For instance, a working hunter galloped and jumped over varied terrain while engaged in the sport of fox hunting. In the show ring, working hunters are judged on their skill, beauty, and style over fences. In Harry's day, the hunter division was the prestigious one, a place where well-heeled amateurs competed on its finest horses money could buy. Fences were of moderate height and style, with all that designation entailed: expensive, custom-made riding gear, French saddles, and fine English leather bridles counted in the judging. A horse like Snowman could never have competed in the hunter division. If he ever made it to a show, Snowman would need to enter the jumper division. This division, where the jumps were the highest and the courses the most complicated, was the only part of a horse show that was judged on skill alone. If a horse cleared a jump, he got points. If he knocked down a fence or refused to jump, he lost points. Open jumpers were not judged on looks or style or breeding, only on accomplishment. Harry much preferred the open jumper contests. Few amateurs competed in open jumpers. The courses were just too high and too tough. And the stakes were high, too. A spill over a fence in those days, when protective headgear was not yet worn, could cause catastrophic injury. To Harry, the hunter division just did not carry the same thrill as the jumpers. Too much emphasis on looks and style, not enough emphasis on pure adrenaline-rushing performance. At several shows in the spring of 1957, while Snowman was still learning how to jump, Harry and St. John won the Green Hunter Division. Limited to horses in the first year of competition, Harry thought St. John might be able to compete over the bigger fences in the jumper classes, but his owner would have to agree to it. So Harry bided his time. Meanwhile, Harry kept working on Snowman, patiently teaching him to jump, one skill at a time. Snowman, the old paddock jumper, handled vertical fences, high fences with no element of spread or width to the jump with ease. But he had more trouble whenever he had to jump, not just high, but also wide. Harry practiced gymnastic jumping with the horse, patiently adding height, then depth to the fences, teaching him to stretch out over a fence when needed. A lot more training and testing would be needed to see if Snowman really had what it took to succeed in competition. But at least the horse could have a shot. It is almost inconceivable that a horse undergoing this kind of specialized training, would not be removed from the toils of daily life and treated like a pampered athlete. But this is not what Harry did with Snowman. Growing up on a farm had forever shaped Harry's view of horses. In the world he'd been born into, people and horses spent time on hard physical labor. For Harry, riding was much more than performing in a show ring. Endless hours of mucking and currying, doctoring and schooling went along with it, and horses had their work to do too. Snowman's job was to be a dependable lesson horse, and that was what he did, faithfully carrying the girls around on his back, the morning training sessions, the painstaking lessons where the former plow horse had to learn everything from scratch. Those were simply added on due to the horse's daily routine. But Harry approached the training of the unglamorous lesson horse with the same care, attention, and dedication that he gave to the more obvious prospects like St. John. Deep within Harry burned one desire. He wanted to ride his own horse, a horse he had trained with his own hands, nurtured and fed and cared for, not as a hired hand, but as part of a team. Snowman was not the most beautiful, not the most naturally talented, not even as good as St. John, a scrawny racetrack reject that Harry had to teach how to stand still in the barn. Snowman had only one advantage. He belonged to Harry. Against all odds, Harry was rooting for him. Harry worked on both of his prospects, the owner's horse and his own, St. John and Snowman. The pair were a study in contrasts. St. John was hot to handle. Snowman was placid and friendly. St. John had the thin skin, refined features, fine coat, and air of hauteur common to well-bred thoroughbreds, especially in the winter when he grew a shaggy coat. Snowman looked like a sheepdog with a sloppy grin on his face. Any horseman coming through the barn would have noticed St. John first. However, the two horses also had something in common. Both were at their best with Harry on their backs. St. John's talent was apparent to everyone. Harry's belief in Snowman's true talent was the secret he kept in his back pocket and shared with no one. As Jack Fromm, another professional rider on the circuit, told the Palm Beach Post, "A lot of guys are starving in the business. They live from hand to mouth and only stay with it because they love it." Harry did not seem close to finding a breakout champion, but at least he had a couple of horses to bring along, and if his $80 horse was the longest of long shots, it did not stop Harry from climbing back into the saddle every day and giving it his best shot. And there we have it. So it's coming together. Isn't it just so nice how much Harry believes in Snowman? I think that carries over. If we really believe in each other, it's amazing what we can do together. Part of why I love this story. Anyhow, hope y'all have a beautiful Sunday. Y'all take care, and we'll see you again here real soon. Bye.